We could hear artillery fire behind us, and I could actually hear the shells whizzing over our heads and then exploding in front of us. And then they yelled double time, and we started jogging down the street, both sides of the street. And, I'm with a couple hundred Marines, and they're all carrying big weapons, and obviously we're not. It's a little unsettling, to be out here surrounded by guys with guns who are looking for trouble.
Yeah.
So I guess, we got what we asked for.
What about your backup? Who's following you guys?
They do have air support. In fact, there was an F-18 that circled us a short time ago. So there is air support, and there are also some M1 Abrams tanks on the ground and Humvees with 50 caliber machine guns rolling behind these guys. But many of them are out front on foot, just creeping around corners, following along walls, digging into trenches, and they're out there alone and unafraid, as they say.
Rick, I think that Brian Wilson wants to jump in. I think he's got a few questions for you. Brian?
Rick, I just can't imagine the situation you must find yourself in as you're walking through the streets of East Baghdad with a group of about, as you said, about 100 Marines, and it's really hard for you to know who is friend and who is foe. That has been the greatest difficulty, it seems, of this conflict, trying to determine who's somebody who's not going to hurt you, who will welcome your presence, and who is out to take you out.
You're absolutely right, Brian, and that's been our experience from our perspective since we got here with the farmers and locals in the outlying areas, and again in the city. Last night I talked to the commanding officer of this battalion, and it was funny because he said the same thing that we were saying 2 weeks ago. He said, the people who are waving at us during the daytime are shooting at us at night. This morning we stopped in front of a row of apartment buildings and sat down on the sidewalk for a few minutes. And right in front of us, there were some small trash piles in the street. And on closer inspection, some of the trash piles were actually soldiers' uniforms and helmets. And that's the other thing that the colonel told us, that these guys are taking off their uniforms, but they're hanging on to their weapons, and they're continuing to shoot at coalition forces.
And the other question that I have, Rick, and I don't want to make too big a deal out of it, but you were with the 3rd LAR for the longest of time. I mean, living shoulder to shoulder, sleeping next to these guys, eating with them, going through the very same things that they went through. I'm sure you developed a pretty strong kinship, and I must imagine there was a little bit of emotion when you decided to change units and come into Baghdad.
You're absolutely right, Brian, very much so. Those guys became family after, almost 4 weeks together. Because we spent a week at Camp Ripper before we came out here. So it's been, 4 weeks with them, living and sleeping with them and eating with them in this one vehicle and with the company and great guys. And, yeah, it was hard to leave. We didn't want to leave. We really didn't want to leave. But the story called to us. We had to pursue it. And they completely understood. They were very supportive. They helped us get here. And we're going to meet up with them again, either at 29 Palms or maybe Las Vegas later this year when we all get home. That's our goal anyway. But I can't say enough about the 3rd LAR. Those guys are a bunch of brave, hard-working Marines and excellent hosts, and we're going to miss them.
And can you tell me anything about the transfer from where you were to where you are now? Were there any exciting moments along the way?
It was a hairy ride. We were in a Humvee and a 5-ton truck that was loaded with our gear. There were a few Marines with us with M16s at the ready, and we had a 50 cal in the Humvee. The guy's up on the, was poking out of the roof with a machine gun in his grip, driving along highways that were just loaded with Iraqis who seemed friendly enough, but they were all stealing things or bringing home stuff that they had stolen. The Bobcats and the farm machinery and big trucks and pushing carts filled with just random junk and pulling stuff down the street and rolling huge truck tires, anything they could get their hands on. That's what we passed. And then it started getting dark, and we crossed a bridge over the Tigris, or an extension of the Tigris that had been blown out. It's actually where 4 Marines had been killed, I was told. They built a temporary bridge over that bridge, and we crossed there, and there was a huge fire burning on the horizon. And then we started heading towards the base camp, and more fires were burning. There was smoke everywhere. It was coming dusk, palm trees. It was just a very eerie feeling and an eerie night. And now here we are, morning in Baghdad, and we just had some gunfire about a
Rick
minute ago.
Leventhal. Rick Leventhal, thank you so much for your report. I mean, we need to just remember here, ladies and gentlemen, while he is giving us this blow-by-blow of his day and what's going on, he is literally walking through the streets of East Baghdad with Marines on foot, and they're trying to draw fire. Rick Leventhal, you're a braver man than I, Gunga Din. All right, we're going to go take a commercial break. We'll be back in a moment. You're watching Fox News coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. A lot going on tonight. Stay with us.
I'll beat anybody's price. I'll beat his price.
Tired of double talk? Here's a real sale.
Regime. In southeast Baghdad, this was a very explosive scene. U.S. Marines using grenades to blow up a significant stash of Iraqi weapons near a military airfield. 50 miles south of Baghdad, in the town of Hila, the 101st Airborne Division got caught up in an hour-long firefight with Fedayeen fighters. 3 U.S. soldiers were injured when an Iraqi paramilitary threw a grenade at them, but only one required treatment at a field hospital. The British military says it now controls about 80% of Basra. That's Iraq's second largest city. British military spokesmen say that there is no formal Iraqi army left in Basra, and only small pockets of resistance remain there. U.S. Central Command says the pilot of an A-10 Warthog is in good condition after his plane was downed by an Iraqi missile. The pilot ejected before the plane went down near Baghdad's primary airport. 2 other Warthogs hit by Iraqi missiles managed to land safely. Palestinian sources say that Israeli airstrikes in Gaza killed 6 people, including 3 suspected members of Hamas. A Hamas leader was said to be among 3 people killed when an Israeli warplane attacked a car. Witnesses say an hour after the initial strike, helicopter gunships returned to hit the car once again. Hospital
crowd of citizens pulled down a statue of Saddam Hussein. And those are your headlines. We do recap them every 15 minutes around the clock right here for you on MSNBC. Sporadic battles continue to take place throughout the capital city of Baghdad. For that, we go to retired Marine Lieutenant General Bernard Traynor with our Military Minute. General, to you.
Alex, it's 9:30 in Baghdad, and there's significant action. The 3rd Infantry Division moved up the west side of the Tigris River, and you see where their tank is. Some of the bridge crossings are there, and the Iraqis counterattacked across the bridge from the east side and were blown away. Meantime, the Marines in the south have taken the Rashid airport and are moving further into Baghdad. But there are reports of very heavy fighting in the south at this time. We don't have the details on what that is yet. In addition to that, we have lost 2 aircraft. We lost an A-10 close air support aircraft over near the international airport, and also there was an F-16 shot down with 2 pilots in the Tikriti area. The pilot of the A-10 has been rescued, but there's no word on the 2 pilots from the F-16. And that's your Military Minute for this hour. Alex, back to you.
General, thank you very much. We're going to pick up a little bit on what you were just talking about. That Battle of Baghdad continues. American forces still trying to establish key positions for control of the central city, and we're just...
Enemy POWs at Camp Buka near the Kuwait border. They get food, water, and clothing. They remain at gunpoint until the U.S. will begin to repatriate some ordinary soldiers into Iraqi society. Others will face war crimes trials in Iraq, in all likelihood with an international tribunal. So far, more than 10,000 Iraqis are being detained. Now, Basra itself, there are some signs of it returning to normal. The taxis back on the streets, some lorries. But as you said, Lori, it is a looter's paradise. We had seen some pictures 2 days ago.
Brought down this plane, but officials are looking into the possibility it may have been shot down. Why? Because Tikrit is still in the hands of Iraqi forces, and it is not in the firm hands of coalition forces. So that is one of the possibilities they're looking into at this point. Regarding what's happening in Baghdad right now, there are reports of sporadic fighting within the Iraqi capital, but certainly nothing like what happened just 1 day earlier. Now, U.S. forces continue to move in and around Baghdad. There are, as you mentioned, 30,000 4,000 troops now in position. You've got the Army, the 3rd Infantry Division, making its way on the western part of the city, and the Marines making its way on the eastern part of the city. And obviously the goal is that they will meet on top of Baghdad and making a firm circle around the Iraqi capital, making it, again, a steel ring, but they do not have that at this point. Regarding other major advancements throughout yesterday, they did seize, U.S. forces did seize 5 palaces, 5 out of 7 presidential complexes in the Iraqi capital. Of course, they did seize yesterday the main one, the Republican Guard headquarters, in which they found that huge cavernous bunker underneath, which now coalition forces will have to go through to make sure it is secure. And again, in terms of what's going on with the Marines over the Tigris River, they did seize one of the bridges, but right now officials are telling us it's too soon to say that they have firm control now of the Sinak Bridge, so that is still an ongoing situation as well. Back to you, Alex.
All right, from the Pentagon, MSNBC's Jeanne Young, thank you very much for that report. Troops from the 101st Airborne continued their hunt for pockets of Iraqi resistance. Near the city of Karbala, troops fired grenades and rounds of ammunition on a military base believed to be a training ground for terrorists. Inside, they found stockpiles of ammunition and abandoned gas masks. NBC's Dana Lewis is with the 101st Airborne near Karbala, and he filed this report.
We are down in what appears to be a guerrilla training camp of some kind. Over here, a weapons range area, an obstacle course where soldiers may have trained. And then in this area, these are some of the many, many weapons that have been seized here. Grenades still in their boxes. Over here, thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition that appear to go with all of the weapons, the AK-47s. There are many, some of them still in the boxes. Some look like they've been used. A rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Stacks more of AK-47s. Major Dave L. with the 101st. Can you tell me, what is this place? Very suspicious.
What we believe this place to be is a guerrilla training camp with all obstacle courses, numerous amount of ammunition and mortar rounds. Believe that the site was used for guerrilla training.
Any idea what kind of guerrilla training it was? There was a lot of propaganda found
there.
There
was a lot of anti-Israeli propaganda found here. Right now, not sure exactly what type of guerrilla training camp it was, but there is a definitely a belief that this was an anti-Israeli type training camp, maybe to do guerrilla operations in some type of area outside of Iraq.
Are you investigating possible links to Palestinian movements?
I believe, I am not sure right now what the division is doing, but I won't make an assumption right now, but there is some type of speculation here that there is anti-Israeli movement.
All right, I mean, what Major L is really talking about is the fact that as they come across so many of these sites, the Army simply doesn't know what they were, and what they're trying to do over the next coming days and weeks is to try to piece together the puzzle here. Who was here, or were outside groups using these training camps for purposes that were to launch against Israel, or were they simply part of the paramilitary units that were operating in Iraq to fight American forces? There are barracks in this place. Over there, it's difficult to see, but you can see there are guns mounted on pickup trucks, and in the coming days and weeks, they'll be trying to piece together this puzzle. There were also pesticides found in this building, which is also very puzzling for the soldiers here. Intelligence officials will be getting in here trying to say, what was the camp used for? Why did it have pesticides? And is there any link between this guerrilla training camp and then just about a block away, these chemicals, apparent nerve agents that were found at another agricultural facility? Back to you.
All right, thanks so much, NBC's Dana Lewis. In a thundering coordinated raid, aircraft, tanks, and artillery pounded the nerve center of central Baghdad. Iraqi forces clearly overpowered, but they offered fierce and sporadic resistance. Military officials say they encountered more paramilitary forces refusing to give up. Libby Vina from our British partner ITN has this report on the battle inside Baghdad.
A relentless assault by the Americans on Baghdad today. This A-10 tank buster dodging anti-aircraft fire as it targeted government buildings. On the west bank of the Tigris, the planning ministry was also pounded by artillery. American tanks could be seen firing from positions on the Republican Bridge over the river. This office block a prime target for their guns. The Iraqi information minister still undaunted.
They are going to surrender. They are going to surrender or be burnt in their tank.
But later, tank fired directly at the Palestine Hotel, home to scores of Western journalists covering the war in Baghdad.
But there has been, at least until the early morning hours, from that same direction, there has been fire going both ways. So I would suggest that there are probably some resistance pockets that are being fought down right now.
How safe do you feel right now, especially after the events of yesterday?
Well, I guess this hotel will, at least for the time being, not be targeted again. At least we hope that, all the journalists that are here. But as far as safety is concerned, this is a very volatile situation and things change rapidly here. So this is a tough one to answer. I don't really know.
Have you seen any of the people that you normally come in contact, like the Minister of Information who has continually showed up at your location? Has he been around recently?
No, this morning nobody has seen him yet, but some of his minions are about, yes.
So you still have your minders there. The reason I ask this is because we're seeing some reports that say that it's very difficult to find any evidence of a government in place in downtown Baghdad right now.
That would be true, and then the only person really that we have seen is the information minister last time yesterday, just about lunchtime, and obviously since radio and television were taken out yesterday for good, it's very hard for the government to even show somebody if they still have somebody they could show.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Means, simply.
Yes, Chris Rumpelt in downtown Baghdad at the Palestine Hotel, which has been the center of a great deal of activity in the last 24 hours. Chris, we appreciate your report. Try to keep your head low and try to get some rest. We're going to take a commercial break. Got to go. Be back in just a moment.
What we call the pickle button right here.
So that's the button you press to drop the munitions?
Yes.
Do you ever feel any pressure when it comes to that point where you have to drop the bomber missile?
No, I would say I have definitely adrenaline pumping, definitely kind of like, you know, getting ready for athletic competition. You just have that anticipation of making sure that you've taken all the correct steps, that you're dropping on the right coordinates, that you're dropping on the right thing.
The day at war, as covered by our embedded reporters, there was a difficult moment, to say the very least, at the Central Command briefing in Qatar today. The journalists gathered there always ask questions about targets, but today an Arab journalist had reason to ask whether he and others like him suddenly felt like they themselves were the targets. Got a little...
Bob. Coming up, everyone, we're going to have a live report for you from Kuwait City, as well as a look at the headlines, as we do every quarter hour. In addition, we're going to take a look at just how the U.S. Coast Guard is trying to secure the Iraqi shores, this from the waters of the Persian Gulf. That and more right after a short break here on MSNBC in our continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Hello, my name is Private First Class Tracy Preston, and my message to the troop is, on behalf of all those of us still waiting behind to follow in your footsteps, hooah and good job, and keep it up, and we'll be there soon.
No doubt you have heard by now that coalition forces are tightening the noose, tightening the grip around Baghdad. The Pentagon is claiming now sole ownership of all Iraqi airspace, including over the capital city and Tikrit, which is Saddam's hometown. There is also activity going on in Basra. But the bottom line is that the Army and the Marines are coming from two different directions in Baghdad, hoping perhaps to meet in the middle in the battle for Baghdad. Let's go now to our very own Steve Harrigan, who is standing by on the Iraqi-Jordanian border with an update for us. Hi, Steve.
Lori, 4 days after U.S. forces entered Baghdad, there are more and more signs of that city coming under coalition control. There are now 6 Iraqi ministries under U.S. control, as well as a military airport.
the Parliament building. Iraqi radio and TV is off the air, but there are still signs that it is in fact a war zone. There are a number of Iraqi fighters still on the streets, many of them in civilian uniform. There are also signs that the garbage has not been picked up in days, and also local hospitals are complaining that they are being overrun with victims, a lot of burn victims and shrapnel victims as well in that war zone. In the meantime, journalists held a vigil overnight, a candlelight vigil, to mark the death of 3 colleagues. 2 of those journalists, one a Reuters cameraman, the other a cameraman for Spanish TV, were killed in the Palestine Hotel. That's where most of the journalists are staying. They were killed when a U.S. tank fired a shell into that hotel. U.S. military officials stressed that the U.S. position was fired on first and that they were returning fire. And finally, in a scene that's being repeated in cities and towns all over Iraq, the destruction of the all-present image of Saddam Hussein. This is happening in the town of El Qurna. It is the Royal Irish Regiment that is pulling down that statue of Saddam Hussein after a little effort. When it finally did hit the ground, it was kicked. Civilians and locals joined in, jumping on top of that statue. Lori, back to you.
Steve Harrigan reporting from the Iraqi-Jordanian border. Thanks very much. When you see those statues come down, it really reminds you of during the fall of communism and those statues coming down, doesn't it? All right, let's go back to Colonel David Hunt, who's sitting here with me in New York. And just a few minutes ago, we were talking about Saddam Hussein, dead or alive. Whether we got him or not last night, is someone still running the show?
I think that you could argue both ways. One way it says no, that there are people, that these remnants, these technical vehicles, these guerrillas, are acting on their last orders, which is to harass. We've seen pictures of them in little pockets. The other thing is there may be someone possible, for example, like Russian advisors, like some of these guys that came across the border from Syria. There may be some Chechens. There may be some other act. There's also this underground city aspect of Baghdad, which we're just starting to discover, that there may be something there that's causing this. But there doesn't seem to be organized. It doesn't seem to be, from the time we hit this country, and to all 19, 20 days, that it was a very well thought out or organized battle at all, trying to reinforce units, etc. No air has gone up, no helicopter, no jet. So it would seem that no, we've cut them off, and that they're just fighting. We think, a lot of people think, until we can prove that Hussein's dead.
Where are the generals?
They're dead. One of them are dead, or they've dropped there's been upwards of 12 divisions that have run away, that have said, we're dropping our guns, leaving our tanks, and gone home. Many of the generals, that have gone with them. The ones that stayed and fight are dead.
All right, Colonel Hunt, thanks a lot. We're going to check back in with you in a few minutes.
You bet.
So, bottom line, Brian, someone may be giving the orders. We don't know if it's Saddam. We don't know if he's alive or not, but, you know, maybe in the next couple days we'll be getting some answers.
You know, it is the big $64,000 question, where is Saddam? And we will continue to follow that. But again, I want to mention we are getting these reports from the British press that at least British intelligence is suggesting he may have survived that attack just the other day. We'll wait to see. War, you know, is a dangerous business. Some members of the media were reminded that reporting on the war is dangerous as well. The Palestine Hotel in Baghdad, where hundreds of journalists were staying, was hit by a U.S. tank.
But not only the journalists. How's your paper playing the story?
Well, it's, I think, fair to say that everybody in the Arab world, including my paper and many other papers and journalists.
Saddam's minions remain defiant.
We are going to tackle them and to destroy them. Don't be afraid.
Fierce battles continue to rage in central Baghdad. 2 journalists died here at the Palestine Hotel. An Al Jazeera correspondent was killed in a building nearby. The Arab Network wondered aloud if their building was deliberately targeted by U.S. tanks.
Is, first of all, we have lost some journalists, and that is tragic. However, those lives are no more important than any other life that has been lost on the battlefield, no more important than the lives of the Iraqi civilians who have died, no more important than the lives of the soldiers, the men and women who have died in combat. That said, it is, of course, we always think that it's not a good thing for journalists to die on the job, but you don't believe that they were targeted target it, do you?
There's no evidence at this point that any of them would target it, which isn't to say that there are not an awful lot of people around the world who are prepared to believe that when you have 3 separate incidents in the same day that the reason for them is still very murky. You know that all over the Arab press tomorrow morning are going to be just that claim. But no, I haven't seen any evidence of that. I don't think there is any evidence of that.
Your sense of it is, and at least it's my sense, that this was a tragic miscalculation, a tragic accident of sorts.
Yeah, you know, the best evidence we're getting so far, Brian, is that the tank commander, at least in the case of the Palestine Hotel, what he thought were weapons firing upon him might well have been long camera lenses and binoculars pointed at him. And you're right, it's friendly fire, not of the kind we usually think of, but a kind that's just as real, and we really do need to factor that into our planning as we continue to cover these wars.
And Ellis, I got about 30 seconds left. We all know when we take an assignment like that, there are risks involved.
You're right, Brian. And you know what? It hits home for us because these are guys we know and we care about personally. You're right. All God's creatures, anybody dies, we're sad. But it does hit you just a little bit harder when it's one of your own, doesn't it?
Ellis Hillikin, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry our time is short. We got to take a commercial break. We'll be back in just a moment. You're watching Fox News. Stay with us, everyone.
It was joy, Adam, because you see...
Guard. Iraq used to provide 15% of the world's oil. Most of it came through here, piped in from the south, then loaded onto tankers. That's not happening now. The Coast Guard is just keeping the terminal secure.
Well, there was a great concern, one, that it would be destroyed, and if it was destroyed, the ecological disaster would have been of immense proportions. The amount of oil that comes through the pipes here would have equaled about a Exxon Valdez every 2 hours.
The Coast Guard has been playing a key role in this part of the Gulf. It has secured this area between Iraq and Iran. They're searching commercial vessels and fishing boats day and night, looking especially for weapons and members of Saddam Hussein's regime who might be trying to escape through here.
We just haven't seen any Iraqi vessels, so I'm fairly confident that we have very tight control of what's coming and going in Iraq.
And the Coast Guard says they hope to have Iraqis working here once again, hopefully in the next few weeks, because they say the sooner they have oil flowing through here, the sooner they'll have money for Iraq to rebuild. Hansen Hossein, NBC News in the northern Persian Gulf.
What is going on in the rest of the city right now?
Sure, you bet. What I'd like to do is start, and let's jump right to the screenwriter, and update folks on what's been going on countrywide, then zoom into Baghdad. We'll start with the good news first, because everybody likes some good news. The Port of Eskedron, Turkey, over here on the Mediterranean. There's a rail line that runs along here and goes down to Mosul. It looks like we're starting to bring in supplies. They're talking about 1,000 tons of supplies starting to move in to start working the relief efforts. On the combat side, one of the things that's happening right now up here in the north is the concentration in this area on close air support. Now, the close air support is coming from the 2 Navy aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean, the Harry S. Truman and the Theodore Roosevelt, and from the airfield in Adana, Turkey, which is the Incirlik airfield. So the rule of the day is we're going to start working on these enemy forces that are up here in the north, so that the good guys in blue here, when the time to move down into Kirkuk comes, we can move very quickly, having softened up those enemy positions, just as we did on the way up from the south. The other interesting thing about the north, we'll clean this off a little bit, is that the main line running up from Baghdad up through Tikrit and Mosul and Kirkuk, about halfway up there is where the city of Tikrit is.
Right, that's Saddam's hometown. Right?
It is indeed.
Okay.
And what we're seeing is from reports that the bad guys are dispersing and into dug-in defensive positions. So it looks like they know that the show is soon to be headed their way.
Okay.
On the terrorist side, you'll recall that a while back, we sort of blew up some Ansar al-Islam facilities over in the eastern part of that country, and the bad guys that survived ran over into Iran. Intelligence reports now indicate that these guys are actually coming back over into Iraq and surrendering to good guy forces. So the Iranians weren't buying their act very much at all.
Hey, Captain Nash,
out
can
to
I
the west.
I want to interrupt you just very quickly and ask you about just Baghdad itself and where we know that huge bombing with 8,000 pounds of ordnance took place 24 hours ago in the area of Mansour. Do you know how far our troops are from that neighborhood?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, if we go to the screenwriter, we can talk about it. Here is a satellite picture of that area. And just to put it in perspective, Greg Kelly and the guys, when they came into town, they took up positions right in this area here. This is the main area on the west side of the river. And to put one other thing in perspective, just for this is the Palestine Meridian Hotel right over there on the east side of the river. The area just to the left of all this, and I'll draw it here, that wedge-shaped, pie-shaped thing, that area is right here.
Okay.
Let me draw that right there. That's the same area. So see that little triangle or trapezoid just to the left?
Yes.
That right here, okay, that's the area where the bombing was. So to put it back to where Greg Kelly and the guys are, they're down in this area right here. There's the parade grounds. So distance-wise, they're about a mile to a mile and a half from where that bombing took place, and that's what the area looks like. There, right here, is the Grand Mosque. This is an intelligence headquarters, and right in this area is that Mansour neighborhood.
Okay, you know, we've got these two embedded reporters, Greg Kelly, as you just mentioned, who's right there where the new palace is. They've essentially taken it over. They were calling it Greg's Palace earlier tonight. We've got we've got Greg Kelly with the Army. Rick Leventhal is with the Marines. It sounds to me like maybe the Marines are trying to head toward where the Army is, maybe perhaps meet there. Is that right?
There is, and we have a map here where we can talk about that.
Okay, very quickly.
Closure,
Sorry,
okay,
very quickly.
The way the closure has occurred, the Marines are coming in from the east side of town. The Army came in from the west and from the south. And what's happening is all these guys are closing up, and that's what it's going to look like. We're going to own Baghdad here very shortly, all of Baghdad.
All right, Captain Chuck Nash, thanks very much. We're going to be checking back with you and the screenwriter in just a few minutes. But I hope everybody will stay tuned. Brian Wilson and I will be back for another hour and a half of our 24/7 coverage. We can tell you that at this hour tonight, it is 2 a.m. in the east, 11 p.m. out west, 9 a.m. in Baghdad. The noose continues to tighten around Baghdad. Our coverage continues in 2 minutes. I'm Lori Dew along with Brian Wilson in Washington. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Yesterday was April 8th, day 20 of the war in Iraq. We want to start our hour off with a recap of the day's events, as we call it, the action of the day.
Leadership structure has been fragmented. We've seen that the ability for the regime to communicate instructions has been disrupted. We've seen that the application of authority has been interfered with on a number of occasions by coalition action. And we're not certain exactly who's in charge at this point in time.
We're waiting to learn if Saddam Hussein and his sons were killed. The pilot who dropped the bomb says he was told it was the big one.
U.S. officials confirming today that they did indeed target a residential neighborhood in western Baghdad, where it is believed that a number of senior Iraqi leaders, including President Saddam Hussein and his two sons, were holding a meeting.
We can begin to talk to you about some of the facts of that mission. First of all, there was intelligence on the ground relayed to the pilots, and within 1 hour of that first intelligence and the first coordinates of where to strike was obtained. That's how long it took for the bombs to fall, 1 hour.
What we have for battle damage assessment right now is essentially a hole in the ground, a site of destruction where where we wanted it to be.
The 4th Infantry, the Army's most lethal, heavily armored division, tanks with space-age technology and GIs with a decades-long tradition of victory are all now being deployed on the sands of Kuwait.
This is one of the most famous cavalry regiments in the United States Army. It was formed in 1866. It was an all-black cavalry regiment. Now fast forward now to 2003, part of Task Force Iron Horse, and you're looking at the most modernized, best trained, best equipped cavalry squadron in the whole world.
They showed me examples of their state-of-the-art armor, including the fully digitized M1A2 tank. The enemy has no choice but to scatter and hide.
Baghdad today turning deadly for a number of journalists covering the war from the capital city. The Baghdad office of the Al Jazeera News Network was destroyed in a U.S. strike this morning. Central Command confirmed a short while ago that U.S. commanders on the ground reported coming under heavy, significant fire from the building.
When they are fired at, they have not only the right to respond, they have the obligation to respond.
And this new Iraq that will emerge is not to be run either by us or indeed by the UN. That is a false choice. It will be run by the Iraqi people. All of us will do what we can to help in that process of transition.
A firefight ensued with some of the tanks that are here. It got so hot that they decided to pull back the American tanks and call in close air support. A-10 Warthogs came in straight, sprayed bullets on those trucks. 50 to 100 Iraqis killed in this immediate vicinity. For now, they are holding this position on the west side of the Tigris River. The Marines are working on the east side, and they are still hoping that just the presence of American military tanks in this town will be enough to crumble the regime.
We are sitting in the center of the city with almost an armor brigade right now, which is extraordinary. So if you put it in that kind of context, I think the end game is the end of the regime, and that's much closer than people thought it was.
Well, fighting continues in and around Baghdad at this hour, and Saddam Hussein's fate certainly remains a mystery. Let's check in again with Kelly Wright, who's standing by at the Pentagon. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Lori. It does remain a mystery, doesn't it? But President Bush was asked that question today. Is Saddam Hussein alive or dead? The president said he doesn't know, but he does know this. Saddam Hussein is losing control of the Iraqi people, and he's losing the grip of his Iraqi regime. We show you now somewhere in the rubble of this massive 60-foot crater. Defense officials believe suspected leaders of the Iraqi regime might be buried there. That after a B-1 bomber dropped 4 2,000-pound precision bombs on the site. The strike called in after credible human intelligence indicated Saddam, his 2 sons, and members of the Iraqi regime were there.
We had asked, can we hit our original targets as well? We were told negative. We need you to go direct towards this target. Guys, this might be the big one.
2 British newspapers are reporting that Saddam Hussein and his sons Uday and Qusay survived or escaped that attack Monday afternoon. British intelligence sources reportedly say Saddam had been in the building earlier but left minutes before the bombs hit. Meantime, defense officials at the Pentagon say it's too early to determine if Saddam escaped the blast. Meantime, as coalition ground forces move through the heart of Baghdad, the area has become increasingly dangerous for everyone, including journalists. At the Palestine Hotel, 2 TV cameramen from the Ukraine and Spain were killed and 3 others wounded. CENTCOM says U.S. troops observed snipers firing from the hotel when they gave return fire. A Jordanian journalist who once worked for Fox News, he was working for Al Jazeera at the time, was killed when the network's Baghdad office was hit during an airstrike.
War zone is a dangerous place. Baghdad in particular, we believe, would be a dangerous place. We continue to warn people, we continue to warn news organizations about the dangers. We've had conversations over the last couple of days. News organizations eager to get their people unilaterally into Baghdad. And we are saying it is not a safe place, you should not be there.
Baghdad not a safe place at all, and some of the defense officials here at the Pentagon also say that it's quite possible that the Iraqi regime is so treacherous that it could have actually placed reporters in the Palestine hotel, then poised snipers in that hotel to draw fire from U.S. forces, and then as a result of that, they would have the kind of propaganda to say, aha, look at what the U.S. forces are doing now. So, Laurie, just incredible things going on in the battlefield, a lot of noise out there as we're hearing reports from our embed reports. It just continues to go on. But again, President Bush, the commander-in-chief, and the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld saying that the days of the Iraqi regime are indeed numbered.
Kelly Wright at the Pentagon, thank you very much. So, Brian, it's good to get that reminder from our president that Saddam's days are numbered. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, and may already be numbered. We wait to find out what happened at that restaurant the other day. We were reporting on about this time last night. Look, there's so much going on, around the region. We thought it'd be a good time to stop and talk to former Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, who is one of our Fox News foreign analysts here. A whole list of things that I'd like to chat with you about tonight, Mark. First of all, let's talk about this journalist thing one more time, and then I'm going to let it go. We got other fish to fry. It was a tragic thing. But I think it's important to touch on one thing, and that is how it's being reported by Al Jazeera and the other Arab networks.
Al Jazeera is being somewhat reasonable compared to the other networks.
Really?
Al Jazeera is reporting from its Doha headquarters, Brian, that the Al Jazeera folks had given to CENTCOM the GPS coordinates for the building where their reporters were located before the war began. They're not stating that we intentionally fired at that building. What they're saying is that CENTCOM knew that Al Jazeera was in that building. The inference being, of course, is that if you knew we were in a building, why would you be shooting at it?
I mean, of course, that doesn't mean that the 19-year-old tank gunner knew that.
Of course not. And of course, secondly, now in the Arab world, everyone knows that Al Jazeera has been the antithesis of what we consider to be a reliable, reasonable network, which, of course, in the Arab world, that's not necessarily the case. It is the most popular network. It has been probably viewed as the most anti-war, anti-American network in the Middle East, and therefore the conclusion is going to be, by virtually everybody, is that we intentionally shot and killed an Al Jazeera reporter because we didn't like what Al Jazeera was reporting about this war. Now, of course, most of the Arabs will fail to remind anyone in the Arab world that Al Jazeera itself was kicked out of Baghdad by the Iraqi authorities because the Iraqi authorities didn't like what Al Jazeera was reporting either.
And I should point out that apparently Al Jazeera has decided to pull its correspondents out of downtown Baghdad for the time being. Right. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, you have some concerns, and you have long had some concerns about the Syrians and all that they've been doing in recent days. What's your latest concern?
Well, my concern is that as I've been watching our reports from our embedded military reporters, as watching the battlefield from a broader perspective, it is quite clear to me that as Baghdad has begun to fall, there's been a huge evacuation of the party faithful to Syria. And that Syria, on the one hand, has been exporting into Iraq suicide bombers and other jihadists at the instigation of a regime that sees itself next on the hit list, and at the same time beginning to provide a significant refuge for Saddam's immediate family, for those who are members of the Ba'ath Party, and they're all congregating in the resort town of Latakia, which is in Syria's Mediterranean coast.
And so you think, again, the Syrians are being bad actors on this at this time?
Well, the Syrians essentially have declared long ago that they oppose this war. They're going to do everything to thwart the success of the United States in this enterprise because they do believe that they are going to be targeted. Look, they're the state sponsor of terrorism and the warehouse of evil in all of this. And the fact remains is that we should now be mindful that they are becoming the equivalent of the western territories of Pakistan, where the Taliban fled and which was sort of outside of U.S. control. In effect, what the Damascus government is doing is giving refuge to the criminals that the new Iraqi government will want to try.
Let's talk about the Bush-Blair meeting very quickly. What, in your mind, is the headline out of that session?
The headline on that session is that the president understood that Prime Minister Blair needed to bring back to Europe, not just to old Europe, but to new Europe, a commitment by the United States to ensure that the United Nations would have some significant role to play, but not the primary role, in the humanitarian relief operations and reconstruction of Iraq.
Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, thank you very much for joining us here on the set. He is an invaluable resource to have. You can turn to him and ask him virtually any question about what's going on in the region. He has a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, a lot of background, and we appreciate you being here at this, as I've said, ungodly hour of the night. Lori, just to recap a couple of things that are kind of important. We've got 2 reporters. This is really kind of amazing when you stop and think about it. We have an embarrassment of riches because we have 2 embedded reporters who are in Baghdad tonight. One, Greg Kelly, who's still at that presidential palace holding down the fort with the army. And somewhere in East Baghdad, Rick Leventhal is walking through the back streets of Baghdad with a group of Marines, about 100 Marines, reporting in by satellite walkie-talkie. So we hope to hear from them a little bit later. It does appear to me, Laurie, I don't know how you feel about it, there's a bit of a lull going on in Baghdad this morning.
Perhaps there is, but we're going to find out right now because indeed Greg Kelly is checking in with us. And just to remind everybody, he is with the 3rd ID of the U.S. Army, still standing in front of one of Saddam's 2 palaces there. And Greg, what's the news this hour?
Well, Lori, you're right. There is something of a lull. And by a lull, we mean we only hear gunfire and artillery rounds go out every maybe 20 minutes or so, as opposed to constantly like we were hearing yesterday. The fighting and the fighting.
And I see a number of Iraqi military uniforms that have been discarded. The troops who were in here first tell me that they saw troops discarding their uniforms, taking their personal weapons, running away, and trying to blend in with the civilians in the area. They would often turn and fire one last shot from an RPG or their small arms, and then try to blend into the neighborhoods that are around here.
The U.S. Army has airlifted tanks, armoured vehicles and other equipment to add to the firepower already in northern Iraq. Steve Nettleton is with the U.S. 4th Infantry 173rd Airborne at Haria Airfield.
The U.S. military now has an armoured force in northern Iraq. Air Force C-17 cargo planes have begun airlifting M1A1 Abrams battle tanks into the Harir airfield, which was secured by U.S. paratroopers from the 173rd Airborne Brigade less than 2 weeks ago. This is the long-awaited arrival of the so-called Herc and the Merc in military parlance. The Herc, the heavy-ready company, are the Abrams battle tanks. The Merc, the medium-ready company, are Bradley fighting vehicles and M113 armored personnel carriers. This armor package comes from the 1st Battalion 63rd Armor of the 1st Infantry Division, which is based in Vilseck, Germany. Soldiers from the 1st Infantry Division say they believe this is the first time that Abrams tanks have been airlifted into a combat zone. What this armor package does is gives the 173rd Airborne Brigade offensive capabilities, the ability to consider taking on Iraqi mechanized infantry divisions. The brigade is equipped with Javelin anti-tank missiles, but those are usually reserved for defensive measures. Now with the tank package, the 173rd can consider moving beyond the green line of Kurdish-controlled territory and into Baghdad-controlled Iraq. It could represent a shift in the role of U.S. forces in northern Iraq. Steve Nettleton, CNN, reporting from the Harir airfield in northern Iraq.
British troops in Basra have attacked a building that they say the Iraqi leadership used as a torture facility. Reporter Bill Neely was given a tour of the place by several Iraqi men who say they were tortured there.
In the smoking basement of the bombed building, a warren of cells. Here, prisoners were tortured. Down we went to cells that had no light, little air, cockroaches, filth, and on the ground, a gas mask and
taken in the 2nd Brigade's custody since this thing has started.
Greg, I would assume that coalition forces are trying to glean information from them, and we know that in the past, coalition forces who speak Arabic have been called in to try to talk with them. Is that happening there at this time?
Sure. The 2nd Brigade Combat Team has an interpreter, and they have civil affairs officers who specialize in interrogating enemy prisoners of war. And there has been some useful information gleaned from these interviews. As I speak to you, I don't know if you can hear that, but that is mortar fire that is outbound. There's actually some high ground around here, and snipers have been working on that high ground. They've been spotted from time to time, and as you can hear, 2nd Brigade responds rather effectively, we hope.
Oh, yeah, it certainly sounds like it. All right, so you said that's outbound mortar fire. Greg, I know you're a Marine, or a former Marine. I guess you're always a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine, but you're traveling with the Army. Have you gotten used to the mortar fire yet? Is it becoming sort of second nature once again for the second time in your life?
Well, it has, because we've gotten pretty good at distinguishing which is outbound fire and which is inbound fire. 4 days ago, maybe a week ago, I would have jumped pretty high when I heard that noise, but I could tell immediately that it was outbound mortar fire. It's our own guys shooting at Iraqi forces. So you know that's a good thing, or you know that's not aimed at you, so you can kind of take it in stride. Having said that, whenever a tank goes off, even if it's one of ours, it is the most violent, brutal sound you've ever heard, and still scary, even if you know they're not shooting at you. Lori?
Oh, I can't even imagine. I'm glad you're there and not me. Greg Kelly, traveling with the 3rd ID of the Army, holding court there in front of one of Saddam's palaces right there in the heart of Baghdad. Greg, thank you as always. We're going to check in with you a little bit later.
Time now to bring you the latest in the war in Iraq. I'm Michael Holmes in Kuwait City. U.S. forces are tightening their grip in and around Baghdad. Many streets now deserted. And a senior U.S. military officer tells CNN's Walter Rogers that a majority of Iraqi fighters around the capital have given up. The officer also says U.S. military presence is expected to double in Baghdad in the next 48 hours. Well, despite the reported desertion of many Iraqi fighters, U.S. forces are encountering some resistance and engaging in sporadic firefights. Coalition commanders still trying to determine, meanwhile, whether the Iraqi president Saddam Hussein was among those killed in an airstrike on a residential building in Baghdad. And in northern Iraq, CNN's Steve Nettleton reports the U.S. Army has airlifted more military hardware into the region, including tanks and armoured personnel carriers.
The military term is fratricide, an incident of one force firing upon friendly troops, most commonly by accident. Commanders are usually reluctant to release details of what causes so-called friendly fire. Robin Oakley explains why.
This time they did stop, but it doesn't always happen. And more than 40 members of the coalition forces have now died in so-called friendly fire incidents. The worst of them happened on Sunday. Missiles from a US aircraft killed 18 Kurdish Peshmergas, 3 US Special Forces, and the interpreter for BBC reporter John Simpson. Keen to get on with the job, the military do not brood on such incidents.
As professional military people, we accept that, sadly, these things do occasionally occur.
Politicians, too, shrug them aside.
Human beings are human beings, and things are going to happen.
But are they happening just too often in the current Iraqi conflict? And are we told enough when they do? Independent television news journalist Terry Lloyd was killed and 2 of his team went missing after their vehicles were shot up by US forces on March the 22nd. But relatives and colleagues have still not been informed what happened.
In every other instance of friendly fire, the Americans have held their hands up. They've said it was friendly fire. They've said it was a tragedy. It was fog of war. They've explained what happened. They've apologised and they've moved on. In this case, they haven't actually even acknowledged that the incident took place.
Friendly fire deaths have been a factor since war began. In Afghanistan last year, 4 Canadians died when mistakenly targeted by US pilots.
Bombs away, cranking left. Wow. I hope that was the right thing to do. Me too.
In the current conflict, Patriot missiles have downed an RAF Tornado, and loss of a US F-18 is being investigated as friendly fire. 2 British soldiers were killed by fire from a British tank. So were enough lessons learned from the first Gulf War, when 35 of 148 US deaths and all the UK soldiers lost in combat were down to fratricide? Will advances in identification technology ever keep up with the growing complexities of modern warfare?
Things are moving so rapidly. Engagement systems, are moving probably much faster than friendly fire alert systems or friendly identification systems. So it's going to be a leapfrogging process, and we might never actually catch up with that.
We notice the friendly fire deaths more, say the experts, because comparatively few have died in this conflict at the hands of the Iraqis. But they acknowledge the need for greater transparency when accidents do occur. Not for revenge, but simply for comfort. Some are calling too for a wider inquiry after the war into whether enough is being done to head off such episodes. Robin Oakley, CNN, London.
Abu Dhabi television journalists have asked the Red Cross to help them evacuate their Baghdad offices after it was bombed and encircled by US forces on Tuesday. A reporter for Al Jazeera television was killed when a US airstrike and tank fire hit the network's office. Both Arabic language broadcasters, say the Pentagon knew their offices' exact locations. 2 other journalists were killed and 3 injured when a US tank fired into the Palestine Hotel, home to most international media in Baghdad. The US military said it had been fired upon first from their hotel. Journalists at the scene tell a different story.
If it's a message, I don't know what kind of message they're trying to send. You're asking me to speculate. I don't know. This was deliberate. A tank on the bridge fired at a hotel full of journalists. The guy was behind the camera. Do American tanks have the technology to see exactly what they're shooting at? Yes, they do. Is this a war? Yes, it's a war. Was there some... I don't know. I don't know what that... The guy who fired that tank shell, I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know what he was doing, but I know he wasn't being fired at.
International media watchdogs are demanding an investigation into the attack, which they say appeared to have been a deliberate targeting of journalists. The US Army has drawn criticism for several incidents of this war.
Of course, the merchants are partially being victimized because of it. So again, it's an evolving process. I read some British press earlier today that was somewhat impatient, that quoting some Iraqi individuals are saying, listen, my cupboards are bare, I have no fresh water and so forth, looking to the Brits to provide that. Well, that's going to come, but let's be honest, people, and be realistic. You're not going to go from a third world country or conditions into a first world overnight by any means. So they can't even get the humanitarian aid in until it's secure. So we're in a period right now where people just need to be patient. It's easier for me to say, I have 3 meals a day, but nevertheless, people need to be realistic, and it's going to take some time.
The Bush administration before this war started said that they wanted to try to not only go in and liberate Iraq, but they wanted to bring relief, humanitarian relief, as soon as possible. They thought that was one way they could win the hearts and minds of people. But it does sound as, given all the chaos that's going on and the difficulty they've had down south, they're having a bit more difficulty doing that than they perhaps anticipated. William Lajeunesse from Kuwait City, it's good to have you with us. Thank you very much.